Project 2025, you guys have probably mostly read about it or heard about it. For those who haven't, very, very quickly. It is arguably, on my computer, 887 pages. Some people seem to think it's 920. It's a systematic blueprint for what the conservative movement calls the dismantling of the administrative state. It is a systematic blueprint for autocracy. Okay? We're going to talk a lot today about the different steps that are in it, but one thing we want to say is this is the second major vision statement by the conservative movement, and Jeff Sharlet, our first speaker, is going to talk to us about a little bit about that history. So there have been other vision statements, but this one came together in part after January 6th, and in part because some of the leaders of the conservative movement admired what was happening in Hungary under Viktor Orban. You probably heard some of that. He went over there, and they literally took a crash course in how you implement an anti-gender movement and how you begin to dismantle the state and turn policies and basically put in what they call a family values agenda, which we know is essentially an anti-gay, anti-abortion, very white supremacy, extremely racist agenda that is deeply anti-democratic. So, 2/3 of that agenda got passed when they put it in place under Reagan in 1981. With Trump, they began to put in a mandate. They put in about 60% of the policies that they had hoped to put in. So there's some left over. They've taken some of those forward, and now they've put in essentially a different kind of project. We have never seen anything like this in the United States. We have never lived under autocracy. We have never seen this kind of detailed unification and strategy. But we have seen what's been happening in the last 2 years here. This agenda is being implemented already in test cases all over the place. So, all I wanted to say to you today is we have a plan, their plan, which gives us the keys to the castle. We know what they care about, we know how they're going to attack us, and we know how to attack back because they're telling us what they're going to do. All right? The last thing I want to talk about is hope. A lot of people feel overwhelmed by this. This is a fear-driven agenda. It calls for things like putting a supreme president in place with unchecked powers. It gets rid of people all over the place. 50,000 federal employees that they want to get rid of with something called Schedule F. They're recruiting to put in 20,000 loyalists and get them ready for those positions on day one of the new administration. There's a whole lot of steps. We have just completed, Sally and other people here, a breakdown of Project 2025 for everybody. So you can see it. It's all there for you to see. One of the things they've done is try to bury a lot of what they're doing in that big document, thinking no one's going to want to read it. So please do read it. We urge you to do it. And then we will work together here to make both, a teaching document, an advocacy document, etc. So on hope, I want to say, people are thinking, how are we going to get this message across? And one thing we have that's different from the 80s is that we are in the majority in this country. We're in the majority, by far. One thing that we know already from the past 2 weeks is that the Trump campaign really does not want anyone talking about Project 2025. They say it's hurting their voters, and they want to disassociate Trump from it. That means we already know we have one powerful weapon. Our job is to tell everyone, that means everyone we can, all our allies and others, about what's in this agenda. It will speak for itself. And then we have a lot of organizing to do. I'm going to introduce our panelists, Jeff Sharlet, Anthea Butler, and then Melanie Nathan is with us on Zoom. Anthea and Jeff, you want to come on up here? We had a table, but it seems to have disappeared. I'm going to introduce all three of our speakers, and then we'll have Melanie join us on the screen. And it's going to be kind of quick. Anthea's is good because she set the bar with only 3 lines in hers. But anyway, Jeff Sharlet doesn't need a lot of introduction to many of you. He's the New York Times best-selling author and editor of 8 books, including The Undertow, Scenes from a Slow Civil War, The Family, The Secret Fundamentalism at the Heart of the American Power, adapted into a Netflix documentary series, and This Brilliant Darkness. He's also a contributing editor for Vanity Fair, an editor-at-large for VQR. He's written for the New York Times, Harper's, GQ, Esquire, Rolling Stone, The Atlantic, The Nation, New Republic, New York, Book Forum, Enemy's Times, and other publications. He is no slouch. His writing on Russia's anti-LGBT crusade earned the National Magazine Award, and his writing on anti-LGBTQIA campaigns in Uganda, which we're going to hear about this morning, earned the Mali National Journalism Prize and Outright International's Outspoken Award. He's also the Frederick Sessions BB35 Professor in the Art of Writing at Dartmouth College. And most importantly, Ann Coulter has described him as one of America's stupidest journalists. And Christian nationalist leader Lance Wallnau has called him a weirdo Judas type of guy. All right. I'm going to go ahead and just mention the fact that we do have Frank Mugisha, which I'm thrilled about, with us tonight. He is actually in Uganda, where you'll hear about what's happening tomorrow in Uganda. So Melanie and Nathan, I don't know if you can see them. Is there a way of getting them on the screen? Juno? Well, we'll welcome them in a second if we can't see them. And I'm going to mention that Anthea Butler is going to be speaking, and they're good friends, so it's kind of a tag team here. Is the Geraldine R. Siegel Professor in American Social Thought and Chair of Religious Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. She's the author of White Evangelical Racism, The Politics of Morality in America, and is an opinion writer for MSNBC, and is a badass scholar, from what everybody tells me who's at UPenn. All right, so some of our folks are on here, and let's see if we can see Frank. I don't know where Frank is. There's Melanie up top. Hi, Melanie, we're saying hello to you. We'll get to you in a minute. And then Frank's in the corner. He doesn't have his, there he is. Hi, Frank. We wanted to welcome you. And we want to welcome everybody else who's on too. Okay. So we asked these folks today for this first panel to give us some framing, some context, some history, so we understand what is this moment and how is it different from even 2016? What are we dealing with here? How real is this? How afraid or not should we be? What is the right wing vulnerable to? So that's going to be framing it. Jeff's going to get us started.
All right. Thank you, and Christina. The first thing was that. How's that? Better?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, and Christine. And the first thing I would say is indeed read the summary that she and others have put together, and that will get you started in a very serious way. I'm going to go as quick as I can. This is really just sort of bullet points, and maybe it'll open up room for questions later. And also, I'll share my contact information. Anyone's involved in an activist work and wants to know more about any of these bullet points, I'm glad to follow up on that. I'm not exactly an activist. I'm a journalist. I've been covering the right wing for 20 years, both elite organizations and everyday people, which is another way of saying the broadcast and the reception. My emphasis and what I want to call your attention to has been not so much following the money. There's some great reporters, I can send you their way, who do that, as I follow the beliefs. And I'm of the left, but not really in it. So I spend most of my time hanging around with really scary right-wing folks. And so if I'm neglecting some important work's already been done, my apologies. I'm going to try and speak to a little bit of the who of this in the context. The convener of this Project 2025, as Anne Christine said, is the Heritage Foundation. Probably most of you know about it. It made its name, as the document notes, 44 years ago with a similar initiative on behalf of Ronald Reagan. And 60% of the policy recommendations it made then, and there were a lot, it was 20 volumes, were enacted within the first year. So they have a track record of effectiveness. But in the years since, they have become the establishment conservatism. And that's the establishment that Trump either toppled or mostly co-opted. So right away, we see some bad news there, right? Which is, this is the competence of wonks put to work for the fury of the new far right. A movement that and I think an increasing number of scholars are really comfortable calling fascism, and we can talk about that if you want to. In that context, I want to say something to Trump distancing himself from the document. This is sort of one of the things I spend a lot of time at Trump rallies, sort of studying the rhetoric and how it moves. If you really want to know how Trump works rhetorically, turn the sound off. It's 1950s Borscht Belt comedy. But it's not Mussolini. And the move is joking, not joking. You introduce a thought as a joke, and you say, I was just joking. I'm going to be here for 12 more years. No, I'm joking. No, I'm not joking. Joking, not joking, back and forth. Put a distance between yourself and this blueprint for fascism, but just tell everybody, I'm not going to be a dictator. Did you hear what I'm not going to be? A dictator. What word did I just use? That I'm not going to be a dictator. So that's the method there. I think there's also some good news in the document itself, right? Because if 1980 marked the beginning of the Heritage Foundation's ascendance in the age of Reagan, which goes from 1980 to 2016, the Trumpocene has proved a problem, as we know, for the establishment right, even as they attempt to morph themselves to it. And that's the first of what I want to point to is a bunch of fault lines, cracks. From the outside, the right wing can look monolithic. It is anything but. Like all successful social movements, and unfortunately that's what it is made up of a convergence of fellow travelers who don't always get along. And that's where we can kind of go in and work on those fault lines. The first one is right there in the introduction to the document, Reagan and Trump. And they are speaking as if these are continuous. But I will tell you, at Trump rallies in 2016, Hillary Clinton got a lot of boos. The second loudest boos were for the Bush family, heirs of Reaganism. The base doesn't like this. So you already see a fault line there, and I think we can work on that. And I'm going to say something a lot of people may not like to hear, just as I think where that fault line is, where I've learned a lot about it from, are never Trumpers. I don't mean Liz Cheney. I mean the strategists, the inside guys who lost all their friends and so on, sometimes dismissed as grifters and trying to make a living. They're clearer-eyed than the editorial boards of not only the New York Times and the Washington Post, but also a lot of leftist publications. They have no qualms about using the F word for the party they helped build, fascism. They understand what it is. And they know where the bodies are, and they know where the fault lines are. So none of these fault lines I want to point to are easy to crack, and I was asked to sort of give a broad map of this, the report, and it says, right in the beginning, consensus declares introduction, already formed. They're saying they've worked this out, but it's a work of 400 contributors, at least 75 organizations, and here are some of them. There are Christian legal powerhouses such as Alliance Defending Freedom, which is arguably the key player in the defeat of Roe. It's now focused on trans rights. And there's long-standing Christian nationalist organizations such as the Family Research Council. And you mentioned Orban. It made me think of a time I was reporting in Russia, and I had really by accident stumbled into a very scary meeting. It was sort of like a league of evil super friends planning violence. And they were wondering, what are you doing there? And somehow it came up that I had interviewed and met Tony Perkins, the leader of the Family Research Council. And they were it was like I had met a celebrity. It was like I met Taylor Swift. The head of the family. So this was in Russia in 2013. The Family Research Council was informing the ideas which have now bounced back. And I think that's important to sort of understand. It's not direct from Orban, but it's sort of back and forth. It's an internationalist movement. There is also ALEC, which probably a lot of you know, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is incredibly effective at getting state laws passed. Laissez-faire, they're not so much Christian right. There are anti-immigration groups, fronts for defense contractors. There's ugly new growths like Stephen Miller's America First Foundation, and it's really a nasty gang. And there are movement intellectuals, and if you're not comfortable with that idea that the right has intellectuals, I really urge you to wrestle with that. Hillsdale College, Claremont Institute, it is an intellectual-led movement. And there's a lot of fault lines between these groups. So they talk about the fronts, though, in this consensus. There's two of them are deregulatory. I think I lost power on this. Isn't that good? Okay. Two of them are deregulatory. One of them is about immigration. But number one is restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. Which is number one, is they're putting the primacy of religion, of God, right? 1 minute. All right, here are my bullet points and fault lines. You got Reagan and Trump. And fault lines there that you can exploit are management and labor. The age of Reagan represents management. Trump, God help me for saying this, is appealing to labor. There are fault lines in the military, and if we don't have veterans organizations here, we need to. And as I said, the never Trumpers. Number two is the Catholic far right and the right-wing group, right-wing evangelicals. And Anthea will tell you a little bit more about that.
I recommend the work of Catherine Joyce, The Post-Liberal Crack-Up in Salon. That's your guide to that. Number 3, libertarians versus book banners. I just went to a conference of the Texas secessionist movement down in Texas, a bunch of men, mostly men, militia types, and the leading book banner in Texas, a woman, and all the men thought that was women's work, so no one went to her presentation. I alone got to hear it. I'll tell you more about that later. Big government, no government, that's something we can do with. Originalism and ordered liberty. And originalism is the idea of the Constitution. We're going to just go back to what it is. Ordered liberty is kind of like big government, like, oh, we have to take steps to control it. It's very much the Viktor Orban illiberal model. And the last one, and this is my segue to Anthea, is white nationalism, the immigration groups, the Stephen Miller types, versus the groups that are trying to expand fascism's appeal to people of color. And if that seems nonsensical to you, I'll just quote Anthea and then hand it to her. Her great book, White Evangelical Racism, and speaking of how some groups can be seduced by what you read as the promise of whiteness. So.
Thank you. We're going to be taking a few items. I think we'll questions for Jeff. I just want to say to the folks who are watching on Zoom, we're trying to get the speakers on camera, so don't despair up there. And I just wanted to acknowledge Jamie Bauer, who's up there as our moderator for Zoom. Thank you, Jamie. We also have Aristizabal, Natalia Aristizabal Betancur, who's with us with Make the Road and will be in our second panel. Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us, Aristizabal. Natalia, excuse me. All right, so Anthea, take it away.
Thank you. It's more important for you to hear what I'm saying than to see my face, okay? Because you need to listen.
Can you hear it?
Yeah.
I think your mic on.
Your mic's on.
I have it on. I have it on.
You gotta hold it closer.
I gotta hold it really close.
Yes.
This is gonna look like something else, but Jeff will talk to you about that later. Project 2025 is not a promise, it's a culmination. And it's a culmination of all the work that the right has been doing since Reagan, and even before that. This was a history lesson. I could go back to 1950 and tell you a lot about how this document really reflects a lot of what people wanted to do to dismantle government, but also to put a theocratic government into place. And when I say theocratic, I mean Christian, and I mean explicitly evangelical type of Christianity that really didn't at the beginning take in Catholics, but this is an alliance that came about through abortion, okay? And most of you understand that. So what I want to talk about in my 5 to 7 minutes, I'm going to try to jam everything together in, is 3 different things. One is, what is the religious part of all of this? And why is it so important to the implementation of Project 25? Second, why race is important to this. And third, what you can start to think about doing about it, okay? So let's talk about first why religion is important. Where Jeff is telling you about the Heritage Foundation and all these other organizations, you need to think about a second track that's underneath that. The second track is religious organizations. And these have changed profoundly in the last, I would say, 15 to 20 years. We're used to thinking about things like Focus on the Family, Family Research Council, American Family Association that have been part of disseminating this information to the regular everyday person who is now most likely a Trump voter. It's not just that anymore. You need to think about things like Turning Point USA that has become Turning Point churches. Back in the 2020 election and the 2022 election cycles, they ran every month revivals in Arizona, okay? These kinds of structures are the kinds of things that you as organizers are not necessarily looking at, but this is the way that the right organizes, okay? It's not simply through these big think tank organizations, but it's through organizations that are religious in nature. One of the things that Charlie Kirk did that was really important when he did Talking Point churches is that he started visiting churches around the country and started to mobilize people about how to vote for 2022 and for 2024. This is where your poll workers are coming out of. This is where all the people who are going to be right there at the polls in 2024 are coming from. They are coming from churches. This is right back in the 1970s when school boards were being captured and textbooks were happening. This is what is happening now. You can see this on several levels. You can see it on the state level in Florida. You can see it with what happened during COVID and the rise of Moms for Liberty. You can see it in Texas with the organization that you went to, plus the way that school boards are being captured right now and books are being banned. So what does all of this mean? What it means is that the right has a juggernaut. And the juggernaut and the secret weapon in this is religion. And the secret weapon of religion is a way in which every Sunday there are pastors from the pulpit talking about these kinds of talking points. Ron DeSantis doesn't work unless he has people to help him. Most people don't even know that Ron DeSantis is Catholic, okay? And so now on top of this, what you have are a whole contingent of Catholic priests in this country who are doing the same kinds of right-wing organizing, which is very important to understand because this is how parishes are being captured. This is how they are geolocating voters at parishes across the country, okay? So all of this comes together in kind of a really bad nexus. So all of the things that the Project 2025 is talking about cannot be implemented or talked about unless you begin to talk about this on the local level. And so this is where I want to encourage you to start thinking about wherever you may be organizing, whatever kind of organizations that you have across this country, you need to start thinking about how do you get your local people to start to think about and look at the local organizations that are already happening that are religious in nature. And I could talk to you more about that in a minute. Second, let's talk about race. This is really important. If you look at what happened in January 6th, every time that I saw a black person on the screen, I thought, what are you doing there? And what I realized is that this promise of whiteness that I talked about in my book becomes very important because what is being offered to people is a way into this sort of fascism that will allow them to be protected. I don't know if you remember this back when Trump was elected, that so many people who were Latino and others who were, were not citizens thought that they would be exempt from what was going to happen because they voted for Trump. And all of a sudden, everybody started getting picked up and deported. And they didn't understand why. It's important for people to feel like they can be protected in a time period like this. Do not discount this. Because what it means is that people are going to turn out to be snitches. And they're going to turn into people who are actually not the people you might recognize. So for many African Americans right now, they have different allegiances. They may vote Democratic, but lots of them are in conservative black churches that are against LGBTQ stuff, they're against trans stuff, they're against a lot of these things. And this is going to be important because if they don't come out to vote, if they decide that they want to vote for Trump because it has family values on the front, then you have a real problem. And that problem is that peels away votes from the Democratic Party, whoever is there, and it makes it a lot harder to do this. This is how groups like Moms for Liberty are making it, because they are basically saying, we are here to protect your children. Your children are the ones who are scared of everything that is happening. We don't want your kid to be going to the bathroom with somebody who's like this. You need to protect them. And a lot of African American mothers are buying it. This is why they have African American women as part of the group, Latino women as part of the group. And so if you're not speaking to these kinds of regular everyday issues, then this thing will be missed because you will not be able to get these folks to turn them. What you have to do is to show them how they will be vulnerable to the things that are happening in this document, okay? And that is really important because if you don't show them that they are vulnerable, they will think, well, why do I need to vote? I don't need to do this. You have a youth problem as well. You gotta be able to say to the youth, what's in this document is going to harm you. It's not just the thousands and thousands of people who are going to lose their government jobs. It's going to hurt them because they're not going to be able to get student loans. They're not going to have the kinds of subsidies that they need to go to college. Pell Grants are going to disappear. All of these things are going to be gone because of what is being structured in this document. And the third thing is something that sounds really strange, but I want to really touch on this very quickly. There's an element of mysticism in all of this, okay? You don't get this without the mystical. And that is really important. You can ask me about this in the Q&A. You've got to understand that people really do think on the right that Trump is the guy, but not only that, this is the time that God has for them. And so with the judges being changed and everything else, this is a miraculous event for them. And he is the guy that brought it all in, and they want him back in so that they can do the rest. And so if you don't understand that and what you're up against and how we can start to strategize against this document, you have wasted your time and these people will take over and we will not have a country we're supposed to have and we will lose democracy. Thank you.
We are going to talk about how we fight all that. All right? Thank you. We'll have some Q&A. Remember, think about your questions, and we'll take those in a minute. We have two of our speakers online now on Zoom. So Melanie, Nathan, I'm going to read her little bio, but hers is long, so I'm going to do the short version, Melanie. Melanie, thank you so much. She came just a couple of days ago. We really wanted a lawyer. We really wanted somebody who represented the legal areas because, as you all know, when you read this document, so much of this is about how can we make stuff that's illegal legal. It's all about rewriting the rules. 20,000 people, they want them to rewrite policy. So, Melanie Nathan practiced law in South Africa during the apartheid era before immigrating to the United States. She consults and speaks globally on human rights, LGBTQI equality, and issues impacting LGBTQI asylum seekers and refugees. She is executive director of the African Human Rights Coalition, the only LGBTQI immigrant and refugee-led organization dedicated to advocacy and humanitarian services for LGBTQI Africans in forced displacement. She's a country conditions expert witness, providing testimony in the U.S. and global courts for LGBTQI asylum seekers from 20 different African countries. And she publishes a popular advocacy blog, Oblog D, Oblog Da, winning the National Lesbian and Gay Journalists Association Award for Excellence in Blogging for 2019. There are more things, but what we've asked her to talk about today is two things. Foreign policy a little bit, and also because, you know, this document is also not just what happens in the United States, but what they've got planned for the rest of the world. And also the fact that, as you know, that agenda is coming from here, from US right-wing groups here. So Melanie, welcome and thank you so much.
And a special thanks to fellow panelists. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Right now, as we speak, we can see that Donald Trump is upping the ante. And he's attacking our democratic systems, vocally preparing for America for this very blueprint that is in front of our allies with intentional polarization and very serious and dangerous blitzes, such as immigrants are poisoning the blood of this country. Those kind of remarks, as we well know, are extremely dangerous. But here's what I find so interesting. When I've spoken to people this past week about this published blueprint, I've had some pushback. Now, this is not probably the kind of person sitting in this audience, and it's probably not many of you on the Zoom, but the kind of pushback I've had from, let's say, your average voter, for want of a better term, is, well, yes, but it's never going to happen. You know, it can't happen this way. It's just fringe. We know better than that, but the mere fact that people are relating in that fashion really means we have our work cut out for us. And the way I look at things is, if your relationship's breaking up, or if things are going wrong for you in life, or if you're having problems at your work, the first thing that you are going to do is introspect. And I do believe that this is really critical for us to be doing at this juncture. It's never too late. I came to South Africa, to the USA in the 80s from apartheid South Africa. Mandela had not yet been released. Apartheid was in full swing. I was a young 20-some human rights lawyer identifying as lesbian. In my naivety, I thought when I came to America, I would see no racism because slavery was over. It was very simple. I also thought lesbians roamed free. I was soon to learn it wasn't quite like that. And I soon came to realize within, I don't know, it was like about a 10-year period of being here, that things were kind of very odd because, as it turned out, Mandela ended up getting released, and he came out of prison and he said, never, never, never again would South Africa be the skunk of the world. And in that vein, it was him and obviously a whole lot of other people that ensured that sexual orientation and gender identity would be included in the South African Constitution. So it ends up with South Africa having a fully inclusive constitution and America going through all these machinations of having to go up to the Supreme Court to do what? To get marriage equality. What really struck me is in the early 80s, and I've been here, I'm now well in my 60s, I've been here for decades, part of the equality movement. And what really, really struck me was that as a movement, we had never established in a unified fashion full equality as being our absolute benchmark. I remember speaking to Barney Frank in Congress. I remember speaking to a myriad of activists in different organizations, and we were piecemeal because we thought that we couldn't get this and we couldn't get that, and Congress makeup was like this, and what did we do? I believe we made a big mistake. I believe we sold ourselves short because we were piecemeal, because we were never the movement that we now need to be. So, for example, Human Rights Campaign, I forget exactly when, but it wasn't that long ago, was fighting for an ENDA, Employment Non-Discrimination Act, that had religious exemptions in it. And many of us at a grassroots level went ballistic about this. We just didn't want that. But somehow we didn't have the power or the money to lead. What I'm seeing here, which is, I believe, so extraordinary, is actually an opportunity provided to you by Stop the Coup, an opportunity to educate, as you have said you're going to do, and to mobilize. And in order to do this, I strongly believe that we really do need to look at the mistakes that we have made along the way. We have never gone on those streets and screamed and yelled for our full equality bill. It is still sitting there. Why? If we legislated, we would not be, we were clinging on to stare decisis. We were thinking, oh, this is safe. We really believed that right up until when it happened. Yeah. Even I felt a bit of a culprit to not taking Justice Clarence Thomas's threats too seriously that, oh, gay marriage is next. I really, really believe that we need to be fighting for the ultimate right now, that we really need to set full equality as an absolute benchmark, and that everything else needs to happen because we need to be attacking this blueprint from so many different angles. But as a parallel, there ought to be something at an extreme grassroots level where we are literally on the streets fighting for this full equality legislation that will prevent us from refacing the dangers of these blueprints again and again and again. In the early 2000s, while we were heading toward gaining measures of equality here, that those losing ground in America decided, with big money in hand, to export their homophobia and anti-LGBT fundamentalism to Africa. A continent ripe for scapegoating, where the symbiotic relationship between the zealots and the politicians would ultimately create a synergy that served to undermine our gains globally. Here, in 2023, with over $50 million pumped in, and almost 400 million people in Africa impacted by the new enactments, and this is happening right now as we speak. It's happened or is happening. Uganda, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, even Namibia are all enacting laws that are so harsh. But you know what it's doing? And the religious right realize this. It is normalizing things because somehow we are now in a position where after the anti-homosexuality bill of 2023 was enacted in Uganda, which carries the death penalty for so-called aggravated homosexuality, President Museveni, the president of that country, has come out and said, extremely emboldened by the American evangelicals, he has said, African politicians, we can take the lead and we can rid the world of homosexuality. So there is this perfect storm happening right now as we speak. So let me just, I don't feel like I have a lot of time and it's very difficult to connect, not being sitting right there. But I hope you can hear me to look at this in a way where we have to look at our mistakes, we have to educate and get to all the people that are saying this is fringe, and we have to look at the opportunity. Look at what Roe v. Wade did. It carved out a group of people that we probably might have voted GOP but won't do it again. We can look where this blueprint is enabling us to carve out people that we ought to target. And it could be that this is where the intersectionality comes in as well. It could be to do with unions. That this is anti-union, this is anti-immigrant, it's anti-woman, it's anti-race, it's anti-almost everything. If we can find those carve-outs, and especially in the swing states, and make that our target, all the while paralleling as an LGBTQI community, our ultimate goal for full equality, maybe we can just use this to make things a lot different to what they have been in the past. With that, I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Melanie. That was a good segue. I'm introducing Frank Mugisha, who is with us. He's in Kampala. We've asked Frank to tell us kind of just a quick brief overview of the legal battle that folks in Uganda are taking. He is I don't have his bio here, I don't think. But I'm just going to say this. Frank Mugisha is an amazing man. He's an LGBT activist with SMUG. He's been one of the most outspoken, openly gay leaders. And I don't have his bio here. Sorry, Frank, we couldn't reach you. But he has been leading much of the fight with the Convening for Equality in Uganda, and he's going to talk to us about what's happening tomorrow. And also a little bit about allyship. What is it that folks in Uganda want from us here? As we look at Project 2025, we know it has an enormous impact on international aid. Just to say before we go to it, if you have not seen the agenda, Project 2025 envisions putting the entire U.S. foreign assistance agenda onto a family values platform. Any organization that seeks to get money or U.S. assistance would have to show that it is aligned with that agenda. And it has a tremendous impact in sectors way beyond health and others. And of course, hugely for the communities that we care about. So, Frank, welcome, and let us also know how we can take an action later today, because I know that there's a request from CFE and others for actions that people can take today. Thank you.
I hope you can hear me clearly. Thank you to the organizers and the fellow speakers and everyone in the room today. First of all, thank you for all the support. But I'd like to start by echoing Melanie's views, a few of those. But I'm saying that, I know Melanie has also worked in Uganda for a very long time, for many years. But what I wanted to echo out was what we are seeing African political leaders take on with the support of extreme American evangelicals. And that include, for instance, the president of Uganda, echoing some of the views from people like Sharlet from Family Watch International. And given that background, I wanted to say that what we are seeing on the ground, the strategy has changed for the extreme American evangelicals and other people who are supporting them. We are learning that Russia is also joining in supporting this movement. And the reason we're seeing this extreme movement that is anti-gay and anti-gender growing on the continent is that there is a divide now that we're seeing growing between the West and the East. If you are supportive of LGBT human rights, then you are seen as someone who is promoting Western ideologies. Then if you're not supportive, then you're seen as someone who is supporting family values. And that is creating a very big divide in Africa here. So this brings me into my next point, that it is very, very and extremely urgent. So stop the radicalism and extremism. Just last year, we saw the Prime Minister of the UK weaponizing transgender persons. 5 years ago, we never seen that. And we have the Trump ideologists to blame for that, because now political leaders believe that radicalizing and rather weaponizing the LGBT community gets them votes. The anti-gay legislation would have made in Uganda would have never made it to where it is now if it wasn't the momentum that these anti-gay and anti-gender groups have gained here in Africa. And we worry about this spreading out in other countries. I mean, most of you might be aware that in March this year, our parliament organized a conference here that was attended by Sharlet in person. When we took Scotland in court, American evangelicals had stopped showing their presence here. They were supporting in silos and behind the scene, but now they're showing up. They're not scared anymore because they have gained so much momentum. It feels like we are losing. So with that background, again, allow me to give you the brief about what is happening tomorrow. So tomorrow we are in court, and this is going to be the first hearing on the anti-gay legislation in 3. We don't know what to expect. We have the full panel of judges ready. We have just received information today that we can, if we need any more information or to meet with the judges, we can do that early, but that is all the parties involved in the case. But we are ready, we've been working throughout the weekend, so our lawyers are ready, we shall be in court tomorrow. The communities are ready, we have provided our communities with safe measures to be at court tomorrow. We were a bit worried that the church groups, the anti-gay groups have been added to join the government in this case. So that was worrying. And this is the first time ever our courts are allowing the government to be joined by other parties. That can show you how much momentum these anti-gay and anti-gender groups have gained. Because we believe that this move by the judges and the court in Uganda to allow the anti-gay groups to join the government in this case is entirely political, because they have a lot of momentum and a lot of support. In terms of action, I also represent the Convening for Equality as introduced. We shall be releasing a statement tomorrow. We will also release some actions and talking points for our international community. The Global Solidarity Group that meets often will definitely be supportive in doing that and will circulate that information. So what I urge you now is to check out our social media, and all this information will be out there. But we want the support and appreciate the support. In terms of further action, we need to prevent this from spreading out other countries. I can assure you, this legislation would have never made it to where it is now in Uganda had we worked very hard. Had we started drumming this big early enough, but we didn't receive that much support early that would have been able to stop this legislation. We can stop it from spreading in other countries if we act now. So the international solidarity is very important. I'm glad we're having this conversation now, and it can help us, stop what is happening in other countries. We have seen how responses like the World Bank, AGOA, EPFA, and also some of the resolutions that have come out from the EU member states have had some impact on Uganda. The impact from businesses that has had some impact on Uganda. And we believe such similar actions could be very beneficial in stopping what we're seeing could be happening in other countries. I think for now I'll stop there, but what I can say finally is that the anti-gay and anti-gender movement in Uganda is only using the anti-gay legislations as an introductory law to gain support from the public. But this is an extremely anti-gender movement. that has got the agenda that is way beyond only LGBT issues. So we also need to look at this as a pro-stack movement and act as other partners, the gender movement, women's rights movement, reproductive health, to come on board because we're equally all being attacked. And then finally, this anti-gay movement is also trying to organize a march and a 1 million signature. This is all aimed at galvanizing and getting public support. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Frank. We're going to open this up to some Q&A. We have about maybe 10 minutes of Q&A. And I just want to say before we do that, I hope everyone heard Frank's call. Tomorrow, the organization is CFE, Convening for Equality. You can find it online. They have put materials out if you are someone who does social media, etc., so that you can get and amplify that message as it's coming out. So, some questions. We have been given some framing, and I'm just going to ask one to Jeff, and I hope that Anthea also will take it up. Jeff, what is the right wing vulnerable to right now? This movement, in your opinion?
I think the right wing, I think, yeah, I think the biggest vulnerability I especially see in that document is two theologies, one of an expansive big government and one of the small government, the libertarian. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, okay. There's two, I don't even want to speak of them as ideologies, I want to speak of them as theologies, visions of this America. One with a strong unitary executive, which this document puts forward, the power for a president to set all kinds of priorities, to hire and fire at will and so on. And the dream that you encounter when you spend time amongst militia types, which is, say, the constitutional sheriff's movement, there's a real tension. And I think what they're vulnerable, and I'm not sure how to exploit that tension, but that tension is between big government and the idea of the local, between the national dictatorship and the local strongman. That's where I think the energy is at.
Yeah.
Anthea?
What they're vulnerable to is sunlight. And what I mean by that, sunlight. And what I mean by that is that the more you tell people exactly what they will lose, the more that they understand what is at stake. And so if you can't articulate what it is that they're going to do, then people just continually think that there's nothing wrong and it will be okay. But what they are vulnerable to is exactly the kind of thing that is uncovering, that is what investigative journalists like Jeff do. But to articulate that in such a way that everyday people understand it. Once you do that, and you begin to disseminate that information, then it becomes much more dangerous for them because their plans are uncovered.
I just add one thing. There's a piece in the Times today, byline Kate Zernicke, that covers abortion. And amazing numbers is that majorities of Republicans who have heard the stories of pregnant people being forced to travel or denied, majorities of those Republicans, if they have heard the stories, become in favor of rolling back all restrictions on abortion. So you've got to get the stories out there.
We know that our job is to basically share the information. We absorb it, we start sharing it. We also know that we're not necessarily the messengers. And that's going to be me who's going to speak to somebody in Texas. It's going to be somebody in Texas who knows their community well. We have a huge outreach job to do. We're going to take some questions. Anybody hands up? I'm going to bring over the mic.
I can talk loud.
Okay.
Yes.
It might, I just want to see if this observation is correct.
You want to say who you are?
Especially, my name is Lisa. Especially on the religious things. It seems like Project 2025 is also a massive wealth transfer
Yes.
to the religious institutions.
Yes,
I
it is.
haven't heard people talk about that. And could you say a little bit more about it?
That's
I'm going to
really
repeat the question for people on Zoom. The question is, it seems like Project 2025 is a massive wealth transfer as well.
Yes, this is really, really very important, okay? And I'm glad you brought it up, because especially in the educational realm, where you see the funding, let me give you an example of how this would work. Basically, with all the talk about, remember when it was like you could do vouchers, and then it was charter schools and all that, and now you see destruction of universities, okay? Let me give you an example from my own university. The Republicans in Pennsylvania just voted down $30 million to go to the vet school at University of Pennsylvania, okay? That money is gonna be redistributed to religious organizations, I promise you, because those religious organizations are being recapitulated as governmental organizations, okay? So where you see the states where they're saying, oh, you can now do this, or in Oklahoma where you can teach, religion in the public school and all this, thereby making enough money for them to get tax dollars, right? This can get funded that way. That is a very important part of this. That wealth transfer is really important.
Thank you. There was another question up here, I think. Yeah?
Hi, my name's Kat. How do you recommend exposing things to sunlight as our systems for disseminating information are being broken down?
Yeah, you don't have Twitter anymore, you don't have Facebook, you don't have all of this stuff.
I mean, even
And it's also captured, because I do disinformation. One of the things you're gonna have to do is do it the old damn fashioned way, okay? And this is really important. When you're out there marching, when you're doing all this stuff, one of the things that I really liked about you, you were saying you were involved with ACT UP. And I remember all the HIV/AIDS stuff from the 80s and 90s, okay? What was important is people were on the street, and you have to show this. What happened at the end of I call it the end, but it's not the end of Black Lives Matter, was that you started to see the crackdown on protesting and all of these kinds of things. You're gonna have to have other kinds of ways to get to people, because the social media structures have been captured by the tech bros who don't want any of this stuff to happen in the first place.
Can I say something about, there are some other ways that you got to do. If you're not, well, you're mostly New Yorkers, local newspapers, the death of local newspapers in 2008, the newspaper that says at our town council, our school board, this happened. That's the way you get those stories out. So there's the old-fashioned way.
We're going to have a comms group later on. We're going to talk about the need to get the message out. I want to see if we've got somebody on Zoom, a question from Zoom.
Chris Chapman, all the pronouns, and up next. Chris Chapman, all the pronouns, and some of you may remember me going back to Rise and Resist and ACT UP and all of that. Here we are again, darlings. I'm living upstate though now, so to you, Anthea, yes. I am infiltrating through as blue as I can be, baby. But in a place where I see more churches than Walmarts, and I mean, it's insane how many churches there are. And I mean, no disrespect to religion whatsoever, but cushioning off of the question that she just said of where can we help and how can we help, and doing it old-fashioned in person, tell me what I can do, because I am willing to go into those churches, and I might be on fire by the time okay, that wasn't funny. But you know what I mean? It is frightening, but I'll do it. Tell me what to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is that whenever there's an opening, okay? So one of the things that's going to be that is going to happen in a lot of these churches is going to be organizing for the election. That's the places to start to go, okay? School board meetings. I cannot stress to you enough to not to go to the damn school board meeting. The city council meeting, okay? Lots of this stuff is being talked about in these kinds of spaces that are not explicitly religious, but they're really important. Both of us lived in upstate, okay? So we know what you're talking about. One more thing. These kinds of things that happen with reawakening and everything else, when they come to your town, and they're coming, okay? Because they like to be outside of town. They did one in Batavia, if you know, outside of Rochester. When they did that, what the local churches actually pushed back against them and said that they could not meet in town, okay? Those are the kind of religious people that you need to also get alignments with, because those churches are looking for ways to talk to other people. And so it's not just about going to the right-wingers, but it's also going to these moderate and left-wing churches to organize with them as well, because those people don't want this stuff either.
I'm going to take a question from the mic here. It's going to be our last question. Guys, we have lots of time in this agenda today to have more conversation here. And the question is, how do we deal with all the money that the Koches and the Mercers and the other, quote, evil billionaires have provided and continue to provide to all these organizations? Just to say that Project 2025 has about $22 million of Koch family money behind it. Does anyone want to take that question? I just want to give Melanie a chance to speak as well, or Frank, if they want to take an answer to that question. Just, if you do, raise your hand, Melanie. You're muted.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. How do we deal with the fact that the right wing is funded by very wealthy people, a wealthy movement?
No, thank you for that question. I was thinking about that, and I was thinking it has a lot to do with how they are organized. And I do believe that if we organized in as organized a fashion, that we could attract the progressive billionaire money to what we are doing. I just use the term billionaire, but there is money out there that we could, I believe, attract. I don't believe that, you see, where does the money go that would be coming to us? It's going to individual organizations like Human Rights Campaign or, the Task Force or whatever organizations are out there. They get the grants, they get sponsorship money, and they get donor money. But they are not necessarily our grassroots voice. And while they might be touting our stories, they're not necessarily representing us as a movement. The way I see it is if we develop a much stronger grassroots movement under some kind of umbrella, which I think is what you are, actually doing here now. I do believe if we show a blueprint, if we show a proposal of our own and a strategy, we stand much more chance in attracting that kind of funding. And what that will entail is really speaking to the truth of the harms that we can expect intersectionally to come down the pike with all this. Look, let's face facts. We are already having those harms. We are already forcibly displaced in our own country. People are having to move around to escape certain states, so this is already happening. But I think if we can show a comprehensive strategy, well organized, we stand a good chance of attracting funding ourselves.
Thank you, Melanie. So we're going to end our questions for now. There is something I didn't say earlier, and we're going to turn this over to another panel, which is going to be very important. One piece of our job is to deal with doing everything we can to stop the election of a Trump or a GOP candidate. The other part is to work in tandem and face the reality that we might have to live under an autocracy, which a lot of people don't want to talk about. But we must. We cannot afford it. We have a plan A and we have a plan B, and they must be hand in hand. We need to prepare for the kinds of harms that are being laid out. We know what's coming. They've told us. We need to talk to our communities. As I told a friend of mine, lesbian therapists in America who are listening, you're going to have a lot of work to do in 2024 and 2025. But in a serious way, people are going to feel afraid, and we have a lot of work to do to show them what we can do. We have taken care of this. We did this in the AIDS movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement. We've got a lot of experience in history. We need to bring it forward. But we need to think about the fact that we have never in America lived under the kind of system that they're proposing. We need to study the plan. We need to talk to other people who live under autocracy. We need to not be in denial ourselves, and we need to support our community to bring forward as much hope and realistic strategy as we can. We're going to turn it over to the next panel. Thank you so much to our panelists.
Hey everybody, so I'm going to welcome the two in-room panelists that we have. I'm J.W. Walker, by the way, from For Liberation Marching Gays Against Guns and other organizations. I'd like to welcome up our two in-room panelists first. First, I'm going to introduce Reginald T. Brown. Come on up, Reginald. And Jessie Daniels. Come on over, Jessie. So I'm going to introduce them individually, and then also. All right. Yeah, that's a really bad mic, and yeah, but they were telling me to use that one because I'm really loud. But all right. But also on the Zoom we have Natalia, Aristizabal, Betancur, and so I'm going to introduce each one of them before they do their piece. So we're going to start with Jessie, then we're going to go to Reginald, and then to Natalia. Is that right? Is that right, AC? Is that the correct order?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. What's that?
Jessie first.
Jessie first. Okay, great. So I'm going to introduce Jessie Daniels now. So Jessie Daniels, PhD, is professor of sociology at Hunter College, CUNY, where she directs the master's degree program in applied digital sociology. Daniels is affiliated with the Harvard Berkman Klein Center and the Oxford Internet Institute. She is the author or editor of 6 books, including her most recent, Nice White Ladies, which received coveted starred review from Kirkus and was included on their list of best nonfiction books of 2021. Outside the academy, Jessie has worked in the tech industry and at Rikers Island. She's also an avid quad roller skater, a fan of house music, and anything else that includes a disco ball. All the disco balls. She is at work on a memoir, Out to the Blue Water, about racism, madness, and the father's love. Jessie, take it away.
Great.
Yeah, here, I'm just giving you this
Yep.
one because they all suck.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here. Yep. We can just get started right away. My name is Jessie Daniels. I'm a professor at Hunter College. I've been studying the far right for 30 years. So I'm going to try and speed through 30 years of research in 7 minutes. Wish me luck. So the first thing that I wanted to ask you, next slide, please. 2 next slides. First thing I wanted to ask you is, did you know that early marriage manuals to help couples get along were part of the eugenicist movement? They were part of a white supremacist project, and I'll let you, there's a lot of tech happening up here on my lap. Part of what these early marriage manuals tried to do was to help straight men and straight women get along. Next slide, please. This continues today in something that sociologist Jane Ward has called the marriage repair industry. And you can find this in books like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and in marriage encounter weekends, and also in something called pickup artist classes. These are happening all over, not just New York City, but the world. And this is where the idea that men should be able to date any woman that they want to gets taught and promulgated, right? So how does this connect to the eugenicist movement? Next slide, please. Well, the family, you may know this famous drawing about the eugenicist tree. The idea behind the eugenicist movement is that only certain people should be allowed to reproduce and have children, while other people who are racialized as minoritized folks should not be allowed to procreate and have children. Part of what this illustrates for me, next slide please, is that the family has always been a white supremacist project. So part of what I researched in my work has been white supremacist publications. Next slide please. And this was my dissertation and my first book called White Lies. Part of what I did when I went to the Klan Watch archive at Southern Poverty Law Center was I Xeroxed hundreds of newsletters from far-right groups, and I was expecting a long list of groups that they didn't hate, but they were really obsessed with white people and how white people exist and appear, and this is one of the things that they're very much obsessed with, which is the family, the white family specifically. Next slide, please. And this came out in the 1990s in a controversy around Murphy Brown. Some of you in the room are old enough to remember this, when the sitting vice president decided to chastise a television character for having a child outside of wedlock. And this was a big scandal in the early 90s for those of you who remember it. I talked about it in the White Lies book as well. This is, next slide please. This is very much in the agenda of Project 2025. So their promise number 1, which has already been mentioned here, is to restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. And so I just wanted to say that, next slide please, that one of our takeaways, I think, for how we fight back is that we as queer folks talk about expanding kinship. We want to love more and more people and different kinds of people, not just in our nuclear family. We are against old patriarchal white ideas about the family. We're against restricting those who we care about based on government rules. Okay, second point. Next slide, please. Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. So for my next book, I spent a lot of time following those people who had printed these newsletters onto the internet. And that became a book called Cyber Racism, and I looked at Stormfront for a long time. I spent a very long time at a place called the Women's Forum on Stormfront, which is for white nationalist women. It sounded like a NOW meeting. They were talking about how their disdain for men, yet they needed to rely on them. They wanted equal pay for equal work. They thought abortion was okay for some women, but not for others. They were generally for gay rights as long as the gay people could be white nationalists. Kidding. And this led me to this conclusion in Cyber Racism, which was, without an explicit challenge to racism, white feminism is easily grafted onto white supremacy and useful for arguing for the equality of white women and possibly for white gays and lesbians within a white supremacist context. I followed that in, next slide please, in 2021, some decades later, talking about nice white ladies and how our protection is fundamental to American culture, and this is destroying all of us. This is part of what Project 2025 is doing, is that they're trying to, we queer people have taken gender and sexuality out of the family and they're trying to smoosh it back into the family. So one of their other proposals is refocusing gender equality on women, children, and families. You see what they did there, right? They're putting gender back into the family. And they also want to rename the USAID Office of Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment to the USAID Office of Women, Children, and Families. So pay attention to the language and what they're doing here. So my takeaway number 2 for fighting back is we embrace a vision of gender that includes everybody's bodily autonomy, and we are against old, white, narrow, patriarchal notions that rely on the subjugation of people based on their gender. Next slide, please. And the next one. The last point that I want to make is about something called TERFs. Now, I'm guessing about half of you in this room have heard about what a TERF is. For the other half, TERF it's an acronym. It stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. I take offense that radical feminist is in here, but for another time. In 2022, there was a great special issue of Transgender Studies Quarterly that's all about TERFs, and they situated as part of the global far-right movement. And I don't have time to tell you all the stats on that. Next 2 or 3 slides, please. But in 2018, I wrote a short piece called The Algorithmic Rise of the Alt-Right. Next slide, please. That one, yeah. And part of what I argued in that, next slide please, is that white supremacists are innovation opportunists. I can tell you about this more in Q&A, but basically they look at any development in media, in technology, in politics to drive the wedge of their ideology into that opening. We're seeing it on college campuses, we're seeing it around the world. I'm sure you recognize the pattern. So what's the thing to do around TERFs? 2 next slides, please. Takeaway number 3 for fighting back. Our struggles for liberation are linked, where it should be everyone for everyone. There are lots of us who are fighting back. Next 2 slides, please. And we should see ourselves and our struggles as connected. Thanks very much. I appreciate your attention.
Thank you so much, Jessie. And also, I'm just going to add one little thing, and there is a reverse too in terms of media. One thing that I noticed is that I grew up a big fan of mythology, so I studied mythology from all over the world, and that was just one of my little things, what helped me reject Christianity at the age of 8. But I noticed that shortly after the white supremacist rise of onanism, and going, and of Odinism rather, and going, and sort of trying to re-embrace the Norse gods, then suddenly we got TV shows like Vikings, and that became a big hit. That was a direct response. Nobody said it, nobody noticed it, but it was very interesting that, there were all these white supremacists suddenly starting to worship the Norse gods, and then all of a sudden, here's this TV show on basic cable all about the Vikings. So it works both ways. I'd like to introduce my dear friend. I'd like to introduce my dear friend, Reginald T. Brown. Yay! Yes. Reginald Brown has a legacy of power, radical acceptance, and compassion at Vocal New York. From fighting for gay liberation as a student to Occupy Wall Street, Reginald has led a life of activism. Occupy Wall Street brought them to Vocal New York, leading them to be a part of the Positive Leaders Union. Reginald learned the power of their story as someone living with HIV/AIDS. Reginald helped win the 30% rent cap for HIV/AIDS Service Administration beneficiaries. They credit their mother for always telling them they could be anything they wanted to be. Embracing this, they have become a board member and now chairman of the board at Vocal New York, a PLU member, and a vocal representative at People's Action. They have helped many find power in their story, showing them it is their most valuable asset. Reginald.
Is this the words? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Reginald Thomas Brown. My pronouns are they and them. Before I start, I want to say this document is scary as fuck. But as one of the panelists mentioned, people look at this and don't think it's true. They said the same thing about Adolf Hitler when he wrote it in Mein Kampf. They said, there's no way this is going to happen. He laid out exactly what he was going to do when he was in exile. He wrote exactly what he's going to do, so just like these people have written it, we have a way to look at this. VOCAL stands for Voices of Community Activists and Leaders. Our campaigns are to end the AIDS epidemic, the war on drugs, which is in fact a war on people who look like me, homelessness, and mass incarceration. All of our members are directly impacted by all of the things for which we fight. We are the people that are at the edge of margins, the people that nobody wants to be around. I am a drug user. I am a person who lives with AIDS, and I am a person who experienced homelessness. But I have a voice. Vocal strength comes from the voices of its members. I've been asked to talk about the intersection of how we do things. Vocal New York is not afraid to throw down. Vocal actually do act up. We learned that in order to get something down, first of all, we will sit down and talk to you and be nice, and we will escalate. But if necessary, we will shut shit down, and we will shut shit down and disrupt business as usual, because then you have to listen to us. We have a captive audience. One of the things about the things that are coming up is that we live in this state of already. We're already in a state of already being on defense for everything. So this coming is not really anything new for us. It's like, okay, here's another bunch of shit that we have to deal with. Our lives daily are in things like this. So we will come at this not with any fear. We will do what is necessary, but we are already intersectional because we realize that every one of our campaigns is inextricably entwined with the other. Homelessness, AIDS, mass incarceration, and what was the other one? Whatever. But the point is, they are all connected. We are also a part of something called People's Action, which is a national umbrella organization of direct action organizations, just like Vocal, in 35 direct action affiliates in 28 states. So we're also part of a national movement. So when this thing comes up, we are ready. We're already ready. We live in readiness. And that's all I'm going to say for now, and I will answer any questions about what we might do later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Reginald. Next up, we have Natalia Aristizabal Betancur, who's on the Zoom, and now is on camera. Thank you for getting on camera, Natalia. Natalia is the Deputy Director of Make the Road New York. Natalia joined Make the Road as a youth member after immigrating to New York from Colombia at the age of 12. She joined their staff as an organizer and later co-director of organizing. In her years at Make the Road New York, she organized alongside young people and TGNIC community members. She played an instrumental role in many of their large-scale organizing victories, including their fight for higher education for undocumented youth. Most recently, Natalia was the director for immigrant justice at Make the Road sister organization, the Center for Popular Democracy, and is a professor, yes, let's hear it for Center, and is a professor at the Leadership Center of the Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership at City College and the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. Thank you, Natalia, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and good afternoon to everyone who's there in person and everybody who's with us on Zoom. Like it was shared, my name is Natalia Aristizabal, Betancur, pronounced she and they. I am a deputy director of Make the Road New York. Make the Road New York is one of the biggest grassroots-led organizations in New York State. We are in Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, Long Island, in Westchester, and we push forward for policies at the city, state, and national level that improve the lives of working class immigrants, people of color who are living in our communities. And we use organizing, litigation, and services to try to help out communities. I think the first piece that I want to share is that there's a lot happening on immigration. I was listening to all of the panelists. The issues and the conversations that we have right now are intersected. I want to share that, like, the things that we're going to be talking about, what's happening on the immigrant community, whatever happens to the immigrant community and whatever they try to do with us as a test run, it will be done in some way with the rest of the population, because we have seen this before in the history of the United States, that oftentimes migrants are used as pawns, are used as galvanizing force of hate for the people who like to rule around hate and division. And that when certain policies, and I'll give a specific example, when when privatization of jails happened, they first happened with detention centers, where they saw being able to detain immigrants as a business, and they privatized that and got investors into thinking about how to create detention centers. And then after that, prisons were privatized as well. So we've seen time and time again that they will do a lot of trials of restricting policies with immigrants for various reasons, and then they will expand that to the rest of the population. So like I was sharing, that immigrants are a galvanizing topic for people who like to rule around division, that all of our issues are interconnected. People migrate to the United States oftentimes because of climate disasters, because of foreign policy that forces people to migrate. And what we're seeing is a full attack on immigrants. We haven't seen a proactive immigration reform pass or anything that is positive. The last bill that was passed was in 80 states, which documented about 2.5 million people. And then after that, we've seen little small pieces of policies that have moved forward and help about 800,000 people, like DACA or TPS, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which help specifically young people who grew up undocumented in the US, or temporary protection status, which helps people who come from countries where there was climate disaster or political unrest. But besides that, we haven't seen anything bigger. But we have seen that they will push forward policies and legislations that prohibit or stop the lives of immigrants. Currently, we're still fighting Trump-like policies. And before I go into that, I want to share that during the Trump administration, we showed that we are able to push back and to put a halt on a lot of the anti-immigrant and xenophobic policies, but it requires a lot of organizing. So if he gets elected again, we have to be ready to go on the street, and we have to be ready again to be fighting on a front that includes immigrants, but includes reproductive rights and climate rights. We all have to come together, because they are going to use culture and they're going to use one issue to attack only many others. But currently, for example, President Biden is moving forward with the appropriation bill, a package that the Republicans are pushing for. And they are saying, if you want money right now for Israel or for what's happening across the sea, what we need you to do is to pass these policies that are the continuation of Trump policies, which include and are not limited to the expedited removal of immigrants, which will create mass deportations and will basically is trying to attack asylum seekers and people who are waiting in the process for asylum seekers. This policy would move beyond the border. So they would start in the border trying to deport everyone as quickly as possible without any due process. And then they will move to try to deport people who are currently living in our communities. They want to restrict immigration, customs, and enforcement's ability to parole people out of jail. Currently, when you enter the country and if you're waiting for asylum, you can be released and you can go to family members, some people will go to shelters, and they wait there to go to court to be able to show that they have an asylum process. What they want to do is basically increase the amount of detention centers so that people who are just waiting for a court case will wait inside of a detention center. And inside of detention centers, the life is not really, oftentimes they are also used for labor. So this is pretty awful. And then continuing with expanding suspension of people entering through the border, even if they have visas, something that was called during the Trump administration, Title 42, which at the time was done to limit how many people can come in because of COVID. But really what it did is just that what was happening during Trump last year, we said that if Einstein wanted to come in, even with a legal visa, that he wasn't able to come in because they were restricting everyone's right to come in. So right now, Biden is trying to continue that and to use that as a negotiation. Once Trump is in power, some of the things, and I'm just gonna go really quickly, even though somebody just told me to try to be slower. Some of the things that the Trump administration and this Project 2025 is trying to do is bring back horseback month-to-light border patrol that will win people when they're crossing the border. They're trying to take away the charges for the people who did that during the Trump administration, and there's images for that if you can find it on the news. They want to expand border patrol and the right that they have. A state like New York is within 100 miles of a border, which is the sea, so you would be able to see more border patrol and being enforced everywhere. You would be able to have tent-like cities, so they want to expand the ability for government to be able to hold migrants and people in tents, and then be able to use federal dollars to create tent-like cities to be able to hold immigrants there.
20 seconds, Natalia, 20 seconds.
Thank you. I'm gonna leave it there, but there's a lot of attacks coming to the immigrant community. They are also trying to take away birthright for people who are born in the U.S. from undocumented parents. They're trying to take away citizenship for people like myself who are able to adjust status. And they are going to do it if we don't fight back. And I understand that the situation is very hard right now, but we cannot let Trump get into power and us walk into authoritarianism like zombies just because we don't like the conditions at sea. We're gonna have to be on the street and we're gonna have to organize.
Yes.
Thank you, Natalia. Wonderful. I'm going to call Jessie and Reginald back up to the front. We're going to open the Q&A. And just while they're getting settled, I'm just going to remind folks that we're going to have some breakout groups after this Q&A, and also to remind folks that yes, Donald Trump is the front runner in the Republican primary race right now. All sorts of things can happen between now and the summer conventions. It is important to remember that Project 2025, when they're talking about what they're going to do at the beginning of January of 2025, they are simply saying the next Republican president, okay? So that means Nikki Haley, that means Ron DeSantis, that means any of them, Chris Christie, any of them who get into office the next time around will be beholden to the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation has been propping up Republicans since the Reagan administration and will continue to do so. So we, this group here this panel here is about organizing, right? So we want to talk a little bit about what we can do as activists. We have a little bit of a template, right? November of 2016, we were all walking around shocked, freaked out that, because we're New Yorkers, right? We knew who that guy was, right? That's why New York probably voted the lowest for him of any state in the union. New York City probably the lowest of any metropolitan area in the country because we knew him best. But somehow we failed to communicate to the rest of the country just what an idiot and a yahoo and a dangerous possibility as a president he was. So now here we are a year before the 2024 election. And so it's going to be about organizing. It's going to be about intersectionality. It's going to be about reaching across lines. So I want to open this up to any questions, any thoughts about, for the panelists, for either of the three panelists on any of these subjects they've spoken about. I see a hand up back here.
I have to try to figure out how to make this a question and not a statement. So, just something that really strikes me about Project 2025 is that it's a very mainstream document. Like, I know that we think that Heritage Foundation are like wingnuts, but they are, you know, they're well-resourced, like people who graduate with not a lot of politics and political science or, you know, not of ideology, like go get a job there. All these organizations that helped co-author this, you know, employ thousands of people actually, like they have hundreds of people on staff in some cases, a couple hundred people on staff. It's as if like the ACLU and Center for Popular Democracy and People's Action and Public Citizen and People for the American Way and Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights and whatever other, and Human Rights Campaign and whatever other like sort of left group that you think of, like advocacy group that's in DC that's like big and kind of mainstreamy, got together and wrote something. That's what they did. And what's the question? It's not just Trump. Well, I think like it's not just Trump. Like it doesn't actually matter who wins. And one question that I had was the lifting up what Natalia was saying about some of these policies they're trying to push them in now. You know, we say Biden negotiated, but he's negotiating with the Republicans. So how do we implore upon people the urgency of stopping some of the things like, you know, even here in New York, we're talking about 10 cities for migrants. Once those become normalized, it'll be harder to stop them.
Anyone want to tackle that?
Yeah, does anyone want to take that? How we're going to do that?
Natalia?
Natalia, yeah, would you like to respond to that question?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Right now, the Speaker of the Senate is majority is Schumer, who is our state senator for those of us who are attending in New York. He actually does listen to his constituency. So the first thing that any of us can do when we want to actually let our voices be known and stop any of the things that are happening is actually contact Schumer to begin with, then Gillibrand. But that would be the first step. He has the power to right now basically not put this in a vote or say that he's going to negotiate differently. Like we cannot use migrants and restriction of migrants for the aid package across the border. Those are two separate things, and it is the responsibility of a senator to understand how to deal with policy and not mix it with foreign policy.
Next.
Thank you, Natalia. I've got another question here.
Hi. I don't know if we're saying her name, but Jason, you hear pronouns. I think it's important that we name that Biden and the Democratic Party are failing Palestinians and Muslims in the U.S. and obviously in Gaza. So how do we ensure that our fight against this are, you know, we say we're intersectional, that we are, you know, intentionally doing that, and how do we build on this in this fight?
Follow up. Want to take that?
So actually, you raised a question. This Barbara, she, her. You raised a question I was going to pose. I just want to add a little bit to that question, and that is that Biden and congressional Democrats right now are playing Russian roulette with our democracy through their unconditional support of Israel's genocide of Palestinians right now.
Hear, hear.
Now, the implications of that are huge for our strategy. This is an issue that's going to haunt all of us as we go forward into 2024. constituencies who are affected by virtue of people they love in Gaza or by their identity groups, Palestinians, Muslims, Arabs, plenty of radical black folks and brown folks who I'm seeing all across social media, and even some Jewish anti-Zionists, are swearing off voting for Democrats in the next cycle. So is there, we all need to have this on our agenda, but what I want to know is if anyone has been thinking already about ways to counter that. We can't just minimize that outrage and grief. We're going to need to face it head on in a very direct way, and we all need to start thinking about that now. So do any of the speakers have thoughts on that?
Here, take this one.
Sorry. Yeah, I have thought a lot about this, and I appreciate the first, was it Jason or Josh and Barbara bringing this into the room, because I think this is really important. The statistics that I've seen is like 70% of 18 to 34-year-olds disapprove of Biden. And that worries me in terms of what we're facing, because I don't know how to talk to those young people about voting for Biden in the face of this. I really don't. So for me, the answer is in shared struggle. Like, you know, I'm a white woman who was raised in Texas, and I learned that my liberation from white supremacy and from the background that I had in Texas was about seeing my struggles shared with other people's oppression. And I think that that's what we've got to do right now in this room, is see Project 2025 and that agenda as tied to settler colonial projects. Like, those are connected. Yes. And I think until we see that, we're gonna be stuck in a sort of failed neoliberal project. So that's my answer.
Thank you. We've got one other question, and then we're going to go to the breakout groups.
My name is Butch Molly. My pronouns are they, them. One of my ancestors survived the Holocaust. You cannot get me to write down or vote on a historical record for a president endorsing genocide. We need a new strategy. My question is, we're in this meeting talking about talking to people. We're talking about organizing. We need to be doing the organizing now. We're a year out. What is going through our minds? I watched someone fall asleep in this meeting. I am angry. Where is the youth? What are we doing to reach the youth? None of us are going to vote for him. We are much further left than that, but the Electoral College would not allow Jill Stein or anybody else. What are we going to do? We either have to re-invoke the old ways of communication. We need newspapers. We need to be in the gay bars. We need to be doing real things instead of what we're doing right now. We need something bigger.
This is the beginning. I appreciate that sentiment, and I think we should take it into the small groups. We have breakout groups so that we can have more of this conversation. And our thought about the breakout groups, was to be able to think about the issues that people care the most about. Some ideas had been that we have a lot of different topics here. Youth was one of them, right? Very much what this person had to say, that the youth are very disaffected and there's an incredible disappointment with all of our politics. That said, we are facing something different with the Project 2025 agenda, which is very much targeting youth. It's got a very central focus on targeting youth and removing a lot of the federal protections, some of which Anthea mentioned, all of the student money, etc. So it's a very anti-youth agenda. So our idea was to break out in some groups, and we had some topic ideas, but I think, what do you think, people, is the best way here? I mean, it seems like we've got some good energy. I always think it's great when we get really angry, thank you, because we are really angry about this. What can we do to get involved? As people have talked about here, this is a historic moment. Project 2025 is not a fringe idea. It has become the GOP platform. It's unprecedented. Keep going, Juno. We do know that America doesn't want this. We do know that the conservatives who are hearing about it are unhappy. We do know that the Trump campaign is freaking out. So one of our things is that we have a job to tell people about Project 2025. And again, amplification is one piece of it. We can use their words. Next slide. Read the plan. Everybody, read the plan. See how it relates to you and what you want to do. All right, diversity is hugely attacked. Muslims are hugely attacked in this agenda. It's something that, diversity is completely attacked. They're removing all references to diversity, inclusion, equity in this plan. It's one of the first things that they do on top of the anti-gender platform. We're in New York, we're in a bubble, we need to get out. Just to say, here's where Trump is leading. You can see the numbers, small numbers, right? One of the things that they talk about is who do we need to reach? Specifically, youth in 8 states. Specifically, women of color 25 to 45 who are not at all happy with the Democratic Party. And certainly they're not in any way interested in the Republican Party. We need to find out from them what they need and want to do. What is the message that they care about, right? Because otherwise they're not going to vote. And right now, their own interests are very much at stake with this project. Next slide. We have put there, we also need to get to the educators, the teachers, the colleges. They want to remove funding from historically black colleges. They want to take all the money to community colleges and public institutions and put it into Christian ones. They want to take the federal dollars away. It's all written out very, very clearly. Next slide. Is there hope? I think so. One of the things that we've heard from some youth, and this is something, is that they have a vision for what they want for this country. Yeah. They have not given up for this country. That's why we see so many of them in the streets around Gaza right now. They're not accepting what the politics is as usual, and they have a vision. They do believe in a democratic society, and it's not what they're seeing right now. So we have to really look at that and talk about that. Next. One of the things we want to talk about here, keep going, Juno, is just to say that we also need labor. It's an extremely anti-labor platform, and labor is important to us. Next slide. Keep going. One of the things we want to talk about here is the idea that many people have talked about these as war rooms. But really what it is that people are coming together and are reaching out to us to say that we need to bring together people who care about issues in sectors, right? Education, policy, law. If that's an area where you work or you have resources, we want to hear from you. That is one way to start plugging in. So we want to break out into groups now. We're going to make a couple of groups here. Yeah?
I just want to suggest one thing.
15?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that it? You start.
So about 10 groups, and then just have you guys have an idea to share what it is that you think is most important to you right now, how you might contribute, and we're going to bring forward those ideas to share at the end of our session. We are just beginning. Everyone's voice matters in here. We do need a lot more youth, and we do need to listen, as Butch has emphasized here. And we want to say that we will be in touch with you. We have everyone's information about how we're going to go forward. We haven't decided a lot of things. This is something that's happening now. We need everyone's input into thinking about how we work together and how we create a platform where people's voices are really heard. So with that, I want to say thank you to everyone. We have an enormous amount of work to do.
When is it? Wait,
folks.
Wait up.
Folks.
We have t-shirts in the back, but Ann's going to tell you when the next meeting is.
Right. We don't know. That's the answer. We don't know when the next meeting is. But it's going to be after the holidays. We will be in touch. And in the meantime, we urge you to be in touch with those folks who you've already been in touch with, the people who have the contacts for the groups. We will be in touch. We have been a lot of different groups are reaching out to us, so we also want to make sure that we bring their voices into the room. Everybody, thank you so much on our behalf. It was a little rough here at the end, but we really just wanted to get started. Our Project 2025, all the separate chapters will be up within a few days. We urge you to read it and share it and bring your thoughts to it. Thank you so much, everybody.